Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Janelle Coker. I am a minister at the Oceanside Sanctuary. I'm also a parent and soon to be grandparent. And I have with me Jandy Palmer, who is an educator, parent, and member of OSC. And then finally, we are so excited and humbled to have the best-selling author, Dr. Tina Shermer, who is the best-selling author of Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, and the book that we're spotlighting today, which is Everything You Need to Raise Shame-Free, Confident Kids and Heal Your Shame Too. Welcome, Dr. Tina.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Oh, so Jandy and I were having a phone conversation, getting ready for this time together. And just between the two of us being raised in a conservative church environment and then leading in conservative church environments, we were talking about the crazy stories that we have. Things like children being kicked out of their homes for being sexually active, girls being paraded up in front of the church to apologize for their pregnancies. So many things that the church does to use shame to quench sexual activity in our youth. And as a church, we are not interested in doing that. So the biggest story we had was I had a mother shave her own head to show the shame that she had after she found out that her daughter was sexually active. So we can just see the shame that falls not only on the kids, but on the parents too.
And it sounds like especially the women.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And as Janelle mentioned, I had a similar upbringing. We talked about so many stories, and Janelle found this book and then sent it to me to read, and I blew through it, so excited. And we were so excited just knowing like this is what our church community needs. And one of my favorite parts of it was just, and I'm gonna read this list because I love it so much. How you said in the book, you clarified that raising shame-free, sexually informed kids correlates to later sexual involvement, safer choices, lower STI and teen pregnancies, and a host of other essential aspects of well-being throughout life. And not to mention just a closer relationship with teens and parents. So we would love to ask you if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and how this fantastic guide came to be.
Sure. Yeah. So thank you for having me again, and thank you for asking the questions. And I am right with you in all of this. So the book came about after I had written the other one, where I really asked questions about how did the church become sex negative? Was it ever sex positive anywhere on the Abrahamic line? And if so, what were those stories that didn't get passed forward to us? And then how do you heal if your life has been profoundly impacted by sexual shame? And then how do you integrate sexuality and spirituality if that's something that you want to do? What does that look like to do that in touch and non-touch ways? So I'd written that book, and then having just tons of conversations with people, what I found with people that were especially in a place of evaluating and deconstructing their faith to some degree, they would say things to me like, I know I don't want to do to my kids what was done to me, but I don't know what to do. So what happens is they do something and I just go into freeze mode. You know, it's actually a trauma response. It's just like, I don't want to react, but my whole insides are flipping out, right? And I'm always like, well, that's the shame you earned, and you came by that really naturally. So of course that's what you're feeling. And you're right to try not to act out of that, because that is exactly how we transmute shame to our kids. I had been teaching sexuality for my entire career, for well over 30 years. And I was a marriage and family therapist, and I taught physicians, family practice physicians, and pediatricians. So a lot of this stuff that is in the Shameless Parenting book, I first actually sat down to write handouts for doctors and therapists and coaches and educators and clergy, the people who are really front line with parents. And I thought, if I knew already that they didn't get training in school, that's just something we do in the United States. We do very little training in sexual health. If you are a therapist, even a couples therapist, at best, you're going to have one class. If you're a family doc, you're going to get at best one class in sexual health. You'll get some anatomy, and even our anatomy books are not correct with regard to women's anatomy still. So I knew that those people needed help and needed something that was quick and easy for them, that didn't require a lot. So I thought, if I can put together these handouts that say, here's the behavioral tasks of a birth to 2-year-old or 2 to 4-year-old or 4 to 6-year-old up to 18. Here's the behavioral tasks. Here's the emotional tasks that they're generally trying to do. Here are the sexual curiosities that they're likely to express. And then I just started to ask questions about how might that be for you, as a way to invite parents and caregivers to pay attention to what was happening for them on the inside, and then gave ideas of how to kind of heal that. And then I just put down top resources right now. Here's the books you want for your kiddos. Here's the books that you want for you. Here's the top websites. And when I did it, I was doing it, like I said, in these handouts. And before I sent the handouts to an illustrator, I sent them around to some diversity, equity, and inclusion and queer colleagues of mine to say, what did I miss? Did I miss anything in these different things? And I got some really good feedback. And one of my colleagues said, Tina, this really also ought to be in a book, because it's so practical. It's really what people are asking for. And I'm like, it is pretty didactic. It's not filled with a ton of stories. So I actually found a book template that I could kind of put things in, and I wrote an opening and closing chapter, and it laid itself out in 3 weeks. And I think it was just always meant to be there. I just didn't know until that all happened. And it was a new release bestseller in 8 categories the first month that it came out. So it really affirmed what this colleague had said to me, that, I think people just want things that are very practical, that they can get a sense of what their kid is like, and I thought, we really haven't had at our fingertips easily accessible or part of the community conversation around basic child development, and certainly not around their sexual or relational development processes either. And we've, focused since the 1980s, when things got really conservative in the church and sociopolitically, really what was underneath that was a push in capitalism. And that's when our ethics changed and became products are more important than people. And parents kind of followed with, okay, we've got to do well in 1st grade, we've got to do well in 2nd grade, and you've got to be picking your college, by 7th grade, like this. And we stopped really looking at the whole person. And we've been doing that a little bit better in the sort of 20 years or so before that. So, so that's really how the book came about. And it was this outflow of these cheat sheets that I have for professionals to just make their lives easier. You go to a well child visit, you guys have done this, and it's 15 minutes, and they're going over everything, and they're showing all the chart and everything. And I was working with docs, and I'm like, you guys have to cover this stuff. And they're like, we don't have time. And I'm like, okay, then I'm going to make you something that you can send at least home with people to help them out, because I'm such a believer that if we are healthy relationally and sexually, we're going to thrive in so many other areas of our lives. And if we're not, if we're filled with shame, we actually know from research that affects all our intimate relationships and our ability to give and receive love. Like, it's core. So we've kind of got it a little backwards in our culture.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tina. As I was looking for resources as a minister here, that's how I came upon this book. And I think in my mind, I really thought it's going to be these great cheat sheets, and I was excited to have them. But then what I found was so much of your book deals with parents looking at their own shame, looking in the mirror, practicing how you're going to use correct anatomical words, all of those great things that you talk about. Why did you spend, because this book is so succinct,
Yeah.
why did you spend so much time on having parents reflect back on their own shame?
Well, I think one of the things I had learned from parents and just people in general in my clinical life and in teaching both was that shame was the thing that got in the way of us doing what we wanted to do better. It wasn't that we didn't have the knowledge, because sometimes we could have the book on the shelf, we could have read the book already, and then our kid does this thing, walks in on us, finds their genitals, tells us that they just made out with somebody for the first time. We find out they had sex, whatever, and we just go into freeze mode because we don't know really what to do, or everything in us is just hearing what our parents did to us, right? And so I thought it's not enough that we get the basic scaffolding of what's going to happen. We have to look at what's that going to be like for us when our kid starts to do that thing, and really look at what's happening in our body and spend some time examining that, really working on healing our own shame. There's a phrase in psychotherapy when you're learning it where people will say you only can take someone as far as you have gone yourself, as far as healing goes. And I think the same is true in our parenting. We can only take our kiddos as far as we've actually dealt with our stuff. And most of us have it. We came by it honestly, but we've got to do our work if we want to change the legacy, if we want to do it better.
Thank you. That's so great. So we asked the community to submit questions. So I'm going to read our first question for you, comes from a mom at OSC, and she asks, how would you recommend beginning conversations with your kids when they're already teenagers and you've not had consistent discussions around the topic of sex?
Yeah, I love that question. And that one's asked frequently, and I think it's such a good one. So if your kids are at a place where they kind of don't want to talk to you about this stuff, and you're getting those messages from them, it's really good to say to them something like, I'm learning some things right now that are making me reflect back on how we've done parenting up to this point, especially around this area. And while I'm going to have a couple conversations with you, I'm going to make them really short, but I'm going to do it in part because what I'm learning is we kind of needed to be doing it along the way and we weren't. And I really want you to have the information. And it is okay with me if you're uncomfortable. I'm going to not make it drag out. Anything I talk about, I'm going to talk about 60 seconds and we'll stop, and then I might talk about it in a week or two and 60 seconds and I'll stop. But what I know is that you probably want this information, and it's in your job description to go, oh, don't tell me, right? That's in your job description. So that's okay. And I'm not going to let it stop me from giving you things that might actually help you make decisions that feel better to you, feel more honoring to you, because I didn't know how to do it along the way. And my parents certainly didn't do it, and you just help them understand why you're doing it now versus doing it before. And I say that to people whose kids are all grown up. Maybe they have grandkids, and they're like, I didn't do this well. And I'm like, sit down, open a bottle of wine and say, I'm learning things right now that I wish I knew 25 years ago. And I didn't know them, but I want to share with you what I'm learning and why I think it's important. And if there's anything in here that you want to take with you to use in your own life, please do, so we just bring them up whenever it is that we learn that, this is actually a really good conversation to have. One of the things I learned from some of my grad students, because I would teach a human sexuality class for therapists and I'd have them do a lot of writing. And one of the things I kept hearing was older kids would say, because I'd often have them go talk to their parents. But they would say, I'm actually really glad that my parent brought it up, even if they brought it up late. Now, I didn't let them know that at the time, but inside I was really glad that they brought it up. And so I've heard that now countless times. So I've just come to believe that even if they're like, ooh, your job when they do that is to make it short, what I like call sound bite sex conversations, but keep doing them, whatever it is. And I can remember even like my oldest is a boy, and he was probably 17. And I had this one day that I thought, oh, I have never talked about this, whatever it was. And I said to him, I go, I have something I haven't talked to you about. And he's like, okay, fine. Just don't tell me any stories, Mom. No stories about your life. I don't want to know them, And I laughed and I'm like, okay, all right. And I'm going to make this really quick, And so you just do it when you think of it.
I love that. That stood out to me in the book, the short conversations, and that kind of gets us off the hook because we don't, we're uncomfortable having the long ones. And that I had a follow-up question to this and that kind of leads right into it. Because, and I shared, I grew up in purity culture and abstinence only education and a real shaming environment. So with my own kids, I almost avoided having any conversation because I was so scared to deliver the wrong message,
Right.
And I was like, what do I say? And so I guess my follow-up question is really like, so for those of us catching up who are, trying to do the catch up and not be afraid of the conversations, what are some of the specific like the most difficult conversations that you think that should be had? Like, hey, start with this. This is really important, practical info.
Yeah. Well, it really depends on where they are developmentally as to where you're going to go in, because they're becoming aware of different things depending on their age. If they're younger, they're just aware of their own bodies and maybe the bodies of others a little. But as they get a little older and they're getting to be 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 and older, their world is becoming more about their community, their peers, right? And so they're thinking about, who am I in relationship to other, right? And so you're wanting to meet them with what they're dealing with right now. And then you might need to go back a little, but you don't want to go ahead. And so I think that's part of why I put the book together the way I did, was to say, here's the developmental stuff, not just around body and sexuality curiosities, but really developmentally, what are they facing right now in their world? And so, like, I think in the section of like 8 to 10, I talk about social media and how you manage social media when you're a youngster and why you need to have those conversations. What may feel to you like a little earlier than you think, but trust me, it's on time, because they're getting so much at school, more than you realize. And so you want to be on the earlier side to say, this might happen, you might see this, or you might hear about this, or I want to talk about how we stay safe online. And here's like some of the rules we're going to try to follow to keep ourselves safe. And you're going to just, and then at the 8 to 10, your puberty is right around the corner, and so you want to start talking about body changes and what that's like. You also want to be talking about the fact that we live in a world that drives our economy based on helping people feel badly about themselves, right? And so we want to then start noticing, let's notice in this show if that comes up anywhere, or if in commercials it comes up anywhere. Because it's actually all over the place, that we do this. Or things like gender, will come up or race. Certain people get privileges and certain people don't. And certain people get blamed and certain people don't. We have all kinds of opportunities to talk about those things that are actually happening while they're at school. We can talk about them at home to raise their awareness, to raise their media literacy a little bit, and also to begin to give them the information they need to stand up for themselves, on the inside, to be like calling things BS on the inside because they've already learned something different from you, right? And that's equipping them then to be stronger in the world than they're going to be if they don't get that. If they don't get that, they're much more likely to be exploited and they don't know, right? So we want to help them sort of get some of those skills. And so there are different things that they're facing at different ages, and we want to kind of walk into that place. Yeah.
So I really enjoyed in the book just the fact that we're going through everyday life and we're just bringing this in. We're commenting on the things we see on TV and what's on the Disney Channel and just kind of making soundbite comments. So I so appreciated this. Our next question is by another member who asks this. You discuss media literacy in the book. I feel like my son and I have had many conversations around this topic, but at 15, he is looking at pornography often.
Yeah.
Is this, in this new reality of pandemic learning, keeping him off the computer is really hard. What should I do?
Yeah.
I heard a lot of just despair here.
Yes, exactly. And yet that is a super common question. It's also a question that if you've been around the church at all, you have a lot of fear around, right? Because one of the things we hear, especially in the Christian communities, is that pornography is going to lead to an addiction, right? These are like boom, boom, boom. And to be honest, there are people out there publishing, putting themselves out there as experts, Christian sexual health experts, and they've done no training. And I know that for certain, right? But they are peddling this idea that porn leads to addiction. It's important to understand that in countries that do comprehensive sex education, pornography is not a problem, and you don't hear about as many people who feel that their pornography use is compulsive or obsessive. Okay, then those are the words that I use versus addiction. Addiction, actually, there's no research to support that, but there are people who will feel like the way I'm using it it feels like it's obsessive. It feels compulsive. It's getting in the way of my job. It's getting in the way of me being a parent. It's getting in the way of me being a good partner. It's getting in the way. So that's true. That can be true. But when people have been given information about their bodies and sexuality and how to respect themselves and respect others and all of that, it rarely becomes that kind of a problem. So I'm often saying, yes, I agree. It's really hard to keep your kids off of screens. That's something that we will always struggle with. If nothing more, to just push them outside, to say, go play outside, right? Just to do some things different too. Again, the computer isn't bad. It's, again, the balance of how we use everything, right? And it's sort of understanding things. But what's helpful for kids to understand, and this parent may have already done this, but it's really, and you're not going to necessarily get the feedback from your kid at 15 that you definitely want to get, but you do want to keep talking about the fact that there are two different generally kinds of pornography. One of them is free pornography, which does a lot of trafficking of people. And the other one is ethically produced pornography, where people use condoms, where safe practices are done, where they never are involved in a scene that they do not want to be a part of or did not design. They are fed, they are paid, I mean, all kinds of things. And that's the pornography that you will pay for, because much more goes into those, right? But they're what we call feminist informed pornography, right? So they are going to be maybe some of them a little bit more realistic. It's all fantasy, but some of it may be a little bit more realistic. And certainly it's produced in more ethical ways. There's a good documentary done by Rashida Jones that's called Hot Girls Wanted. I think I've got that right. Hot Girls Wanted. Well, anyway, you can look it up on Rashida Jones. Yeah, Hot Girls Wanted is the name of the documentary. And then after that, she did a series of like 9 TV shows that was called Hot Girls Wanted Turned On. And that was like 8 episodes. The documentary shows you how free pornography is produced, how they get the women to do it, how they advertise for them, the hurt that it ends up producing in people's lives. And you know, we've got 2 of 4 kids, 2 of our boys. We have 2 boys and 4 kids. And I remember having these conversations with them about, your friends are going to be talking about this all the time. They are developing what we call the boy code. And there's a lot of media pressure for you to be talking about porn use. The guys all talking amongst themselves. But I need you to understand some things. I need you to understand that it's fantasy and we don't live our fantasies. In other words, if you believe in Spider-Man, Spider-Man's a super fun show to watch, and you're not going to go jump building to building and expect to live, right? There's a difference between fantasy and reality. We can enjoy fantasy, but we've got to understand the difference. And if you, as my son, watch a lot of pornography, you're going to get the idea about what women like that is not going to be accurate. And it's actually going to make you a very bad lover. And I would hate that for you, actually, because I think, and I said this to my kids, I think your sexuality is one of the most wonderful gifts God ever gave you. And I want you to love it. I want you to love yourself in it. And I want you to know how to love, truly love someone else, which means listening to them and who are they and what do they like and what don't they like. If you can't talk about these things, you shouldn't be doing those things. But if you've only been getting your education from Spider-Man porn, then you're going to do things that are actually abusive, hurtful, because you're not going to ask consent, you're going to make assumptions, and you could find yourself not only being a bad lover, but actually getting yourself in some serious trouble, right? And so I want you informed, because your friends aren't going to tell you this, but it's what I know about sexual health. You've got to learn how, if you're straight, and this is particularly true in straight porn, it is not, the humiliation and violence that we see in straight porn is not in lesbian or gay porn. And we did not have violence against women in just about in much of our media, music videos, video games, pornography, until 1986 and after. Okay, so we started pulling the regulations, the FCC regulations in the United States, where you could put anything now on TV. That happened in the mid 80s. At the same time, we had music videos going on, video games increasing, and then the internet was shortly thereafter, right? And so there was this just really bad tsunami of things that were happening. So if you're raising a straight boy, you want to have these conversations about the cost of learning about sexuality through free pornography. And you can say, I would prefer that you not watch it. I am probably going to be ineffective in being over your life all along. And honestly, you're going to have to learn how to figure out what kind of a young man you want to be. And if you want to be a good partner and a good lover to someone else, trust me, you do not want to be learning it there. And I will find you all the sexual health books so that you can learn to be really good, but it's not going to be there.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think it's so interesting that we're talking about the 1980s and what was happening in our media, and then this rise of the purity culture movement. Right. We were at Pride here at our little town in Oceanside, and there was a woman walking around with a shirt that said, "I survived sex ed in church." And just how it's a stamp of difficulty on so many people. Right. And I think that we've heard a lot from parents that, okay, we're ready to strip off the purity culture, but at the same time, I don't know what to replace it with. Yes. And one of the things I'm hearing from you is really replace it with information.
Yes.
just really having really informed talks with your kids.
That's right. And, I want to say that we have a long, long, long history of this idea that if I talk about it, my kids are going to do it. Right? We have a long history of that idea. That is not borne out in research. In fact, just like you said at the beginning of this, the opposite is what is borne out in research. And if you think about it, there isn't probably any other important area of our life where we think to ourselves, I'm going to not provide information to my child, and then I'm going to expect them to be informed, to be safe, and to be informed. In other words, you're going to drive a car at 16 or 17. I'm going to make sure you get nowhere near one, that you don't understand how they work, that you don't get directions on how they drive, that you don't get directions on the road, because it's way too dangerous to give that to you. Because if I do, you're just going to go steal the car. So I'm not going to do that. But when you're 16 and 17, I'm going to hand you keys to a car, and then I'm going to expect you to be safe. It doesn't make any sense. We don't do that in any other area. So when we provide integrated information about the body, relationships, how you respect yourself, how you respect others, how you talk about things, blah, blah, we do all that, then kids can call out the BS that's happening in front of them. And when they hear it from a friend, like somebody says, oh no, girls love having their hair pulled. Well, no, actually they don't. Unless you ask them and they tell you that they do, I would not assume that they do. Right? Or fill in the blank, really. Fill in the blank. Yeah.
You've talked a little bit about consent, and I think that that's a really important boundary to talk about with our children.
Yeah.
And I think part of this is changing our ideas of what the boundaries are that we teach. So when we're replacing purity culture with a new kind of sexual ethic that is, as followers of Christ, God informed, I think we've heard from parents that I'm just so afraid I just don't say anything. I just don't even say anything because I don't want to harm them with more shame. So I'm hearing consent as a boundary that we need to uphold. Are there other boundaries that we as well-informed people can make? I know that, like in the book, you talk a little bit about, like, if you see the neighbor playing doctor with your child, it's okay to say, this is not the time, for this. But can you talk about how we set those boundaries without just freaking out?
Right. Well, again, it's helpful to know when different curiosities arise, and being curious about other people's bodies happens, somewhere between 4 and 6 and 7, somewhere in there. And so, I talk a lot in the book about if kids are within the same age, within 12, 15 months or so, and they're about the same size, then there's not going to probably be much manipulation or coercion that the other one can't handle, right? Like, I don't want to do that, like whatever, if they're in this sort of same age bracket. When you get bigger than 18 months, then you've got someone that might be bigger and smarter around different things and can use manipulation, right? And when I use the word manipulation, what I want to emphasize here is I'm not meaning it in a pejorative or negative way. We're humans. We want what we want, right? If you're a child human, you'll try to get that any way you can. And that doesn't mean you're bad. You just haven't learned how to be more aware of the impact of your actions yet. Because of that, though, we as parents, it falls on our responsibility to make sure kids are getting adequate supervision. So if somebody starts to manipulate another one, we can step in and say, did that feel fair? If that had been you, would that have felt fair? And if they say, no, this is not fair, well, you're actually doing what we call abusing your power. And we don't do that because it doesn't feel good. Like if I did something like that to you, how would it feel to you? And I know better, so I'm not going to. So I'm going to teach you to be mindful of somebody who's younger, that. So we start teaching power differentials. We teach about abuse of power in these little soundbite, again, kinds of ways. If they're the same age and you catch them with their pants down, poking at each other or whatever they're doing, you can say, oh, I bet you were curious about each other, weren't you? Well, let's put our clothes back on because we're going to keep our clothes on. And you just, shuffle them on. You don't make an issue of it, but you can say your curiosity is normal. What you're doing is right in your job description, and we're going to get dressed and go do something else right now. It's just part of the learning process. There's nothing bad about it. And they're not going to keep doing it once they have gotten things figured out for themselves, to be like, oh yeah, I get it, and they'll move on. We need to kind of do the same thing. And so I talk about those things that are going to arise at the different ages. Another thing which isn't around bodies and sexuality, but very much is age in there, is kids like from 4 to 7 or 8, their imagination, what I call their creative genius, is really bursting in on the scenes, right? And they are wanting you to be this animal and that thing and whatever. They come home from swimming and they tell you that they swam underwater for 25 hours during their swim lesson, right? And they're differentiating fantasy from reality during those 3 or 4 years, but it doesn't happen overnight. So our job isn't to see it as lying. Our job is to go, oh, wouldn't that be the funnest thing if we could have swim underwater like all day, like the whales do? But doggone it, we have to breathe, so we are teaching them to differentiate, but not in any way that says you shouldn't be right where you are, because you are right where you are, and that's fine. That's good, actually. I think when we think about boundaries and consent, what I am so grateful for right now is how many more children's books there are out there that teach some of these things. I was reading to my 4-year-old granddaughter a book called Don't Hug Doug, which was all about Doug doesn't like hugs, and all these other people in Doug's life like hugs, but Doug doesn't like hugs. And it gave a great opportunity to say we're all different, and we have to ask, is it okay if I give you a hug or not? Because some people are going to say yes, but people like Doug are going to say no. Only my mom hugs me, and it's only at nighttime, And so there are lots of different places to start teaching about body autonomy and consent, where I begin and end and you begin and end, how to treat each other with kindness, how to use our words, all of that stuff it's all part of sex education. It's all part of teaching kids to be emotionally intelligent and body intelligent as well.
So I wanted to open it up. I know that I've had our Zoom person sending out that if there's any questions that have come up, I want to make sure that everybody can feel free to ask some questions. So feel free to put something in the chat if you have a specific question. I love the point in the book where you talk about the task, or as you just said, job description. Mm-hmm. And I am interested, what brought you to that term? Because for me, I felt reading it like it takes all the sting out of it or the behavior out. It is their job to learn about masturbation at, 2 to 3 years old. So is that why you did that, or how did you come up with those terms?
Yeah, that one just fell out of the sky one day when I was parenting. I got a lot of child development when I was in college. I was a teacher. I was junior high and high school teacher first, actually in La Jolla, not far from you, is where I started. And that information I loved learning. And so when I had my own kids, I was just watching them do the things that were right in line with what they were going to do at that age. And at one day, it just came into my head. It's like, you're doing your job. You're fulfilling your job. This is what you're supposed to do right now. I'm supposed to parent. You're supposed to discover independence and learn how to say no and try to be separate from me and do all of these things that might be hard to parent, but it's not because you're not doing exactly what you should be doing. My job is to manage my emotions around it and teach you self-soothing by soothing myself. Because kids learn from modeling, right? And so if they come in with high energy, like screaming, yelling, and then we come in with that, then we're teaching them that that's an okay way to deal with something, right? We have to meet their high energy with calmness and with something that's halfway centered. Now, that's hard to do. And it might mean that we close our mouth. It might mean that we look this way. It might be that we go to the bathroom. It might be we do a lot of things to calm ourselves. But we calm ourselves and we ask ourselves, is this right in their job description? Because if it is, then my job is to teach them how to emotionally do this thing they're trying to do without flipping out, right? Because they're flipping out because they're mad or they're whatever, they're tired, you know? And so my job is to help them grow in their emotional maturity, because I'm the one that's supposed to be there already, right? Which again means we've got to take really good care of ourselves as parents. And I'll tell you a book that my son and daughter-in-law recently read that they loved and they told me about, and I'm almost finished with it now, called Hunt, Gather, Parent. And it's a book that looks at parenting from some ancient cultures that have really stayed with a kind of parenting that has been very successful for thousands of years. And we actually used to do that too when we lived in community and we lived on farms, and we kind of had more of a village kind of approach to our raising of kids, and not so product oriented like we are now. In the last several generations, we've moved away from it, and we're actually in many ways doing everything wrong, you know, because we are hovering, we're not giving them autonomy, we're not keeping them connected to us. We get mad at them and we say, go in timeout, go separate yourself, right? They are all about togetherness. Well, back in the day, if the auntie was around or the grandmother was around, we would say, go over to your auntie's house and play with them for a while, or go play with your cousins for a while, or whatever. You know, they would stay in togetherness, but they wouldn't be in our togetherness, right? And they need that kind of encouragement, and they need much more minimal, not involvement, but just like over management. They need much less of that than we've been doing in recent generations, because that's how they build some of their own sense of autonomy and resilience, and they fall down and they figure out how to get up, and they learn strength through not having somebody do everything for them actually and tell them what to do. So our instincts right now in parenting have been going in the wrong direction for the last couple of generations, and we can see the downside of that we have kids that are less confident, we have kids that are less resilient, we have kids that expect things to be handed to them that don't get handed to you in your adult life. You know, like I'd have grad students say, why did I get such and such a grade? And I would look at them and say, you have the syllabus. You know what it took to get that grade, and you didn't get that grade. So that's not on me. But, you know, there was this sense of expectation that I should just get it, you know? So I think books like that have been really helpful to people who are like, how do I manage my emotion with my child? Because my instincts it's not working. You know, I get more in their face and they get bigger and bigger, and then I get bigger and bigger, and it's trouble fast, you know.
Okay, I've gotten a couple of texts here. So with questions.
Yeah.
Jandy, before I ask, do you have anything to add with this conversation before I move on? Or I don't want to.
No, go ahead. I'm just enjoying taking it all in.
Thank you. Okay, so Again, I want to just add too, I love that we've talked a lot about verbally talking about sex, but then I've also heard you really talking about the nonverbals and self-soothing, teaching how to self-soothe because you soothe yourself.
Yes.
And I'm struck by not hovering and how that might be tied to teaching our kids about consent, because if we are not allowing them to consent while we're always hovering over them, that they're getting mixed messages. So
that's exactly right.
I
That's
really
a really
appreciate
good point.
that
Mhm.
connection. So the question that let's see, I have to put my code in now. Okay. So the question is, what is making you hopeful about the future of sex and sex education in our churches and in our wider culture?
Oh, that's such a great question. You know, my hope comes as I can see some shifts occurring. So for example, as of a couple years ago, we had maybe 16 states that required their sex education to be medically accurate. All the rest did not. You know, that's 34 states that don't have to have medically accurate sex education. We're now up to 18. So, you know, when I see another state pass that at the state level, that their sex education at each grade that it's offered has to be medically accurate and age appropriate, then I know that we are doing things that actually make a difference in kids' lives. You know, all of the people that I have met that are asking the questions that you two are asking, and your community is asking, how do I do it better than what was done for me? I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a therapist when my kids were young, and she said, Tina, she said, every place where you want to do it different than your parents, you're going to work twice as hard. But the gift you're going to give your children is they're not going to have to work hard at all. And that was such a comfort to me, because I thought, okay, I can put in the work. I can do it. I can do therapy. I can get my community around me to support me. I can figure out how to do some of these things. I won't do it perfectly. None of us do, but I can do better. And then I'm giving my kids, their default is going to be even better, right? And that's what I want. That's the direction that I want things to go. And so I love supporting parents in trying to get the support they need to be that change agent, because you can actually change this legacy in one generation. And I've watched it happen where people, you know, worked really hard and they gave their kids open conversations. And when their kids came home and said something that freaked them out, they learned to go, oh, interesting, and kind of keep a neutral face, you know, even though their insides were crazy. But then they're like, my kid has stayed connected to me all the way through adolescence, you know. Or I opened the book with a story of a couple that contacted me because they had found out that their 14-year-old had become sexual. They had grown up purity culture. They had already, we had conversations in their life around how you do it, but this just threw them completely, right? And they felt all the feelings like, what did we do wrong? Should we pick up our family? Should we move out of state? You know, they felt all the feelings, and they didn't do anything at first. They just called me or wrote me, and I just said, here's some things, take a deep breath, give yourself a couple of days. And then when they did sit down, they were in a completely different place, and they really talked to her about, so we're not mad at all. That's not what this is. We want to know why you think you're ready for this. And then we want to invite you to think through some questions to make sure that this is a decision that you want to make now. Whatever you do, you're writing your own sexual narrative. We wrote ours already, but we want you to put some thought into the one that you're writing. And we're here to be your resource, your supports. You know, and so they just were calm. And at the end of it, their daughter like climbed in their lap and said, I am not ready for this. Yeah, I'm not ready right this moment. You know, and these kinds of things are going to happen, that your kids are going to do something and your insides are just going to go crazy. But if you can just keep practicing breathing, bringing curiosity, like, tell me more, or I think I'm going to need to get some help on talking. I had a dad who's a widower call me last week, and I've known him a long time, and he has a 16-year-old, and his 16-year-old daughter has become involved with her boyfriend. And so he said to her, I'm gonna just try to just talk and understand things as best as I can. And then tomorrow I'm going to call Tina so that we can kind of talk this through a little bit. And, you know, and she knows me too. And so you reach out, you ask for help, you know, and you just sort of keep going. But ultimately, you're going to be giving your kids so much more solid resources and a solid sense of being loved and supported, seen, known, loved, and accepted than you got when you were just being 13 and 15 and 17 and 19 or whatever, and making mistakes and all of that, you know. But to not have somebody over you going, how can you, how could you, you know. One of the things that people have heard me say before, which I am a real believer of, is that if God wanted us to have it figured out sooner, or to learn just by being told, then this thing called the prefrontal lobe, where we do all of our executive functioning, would be developing a whole lot sooner than 25 or 28, which is when it's finished. So God must know that we're going to learn through our mistakes. And I used to say to my kids, a mistake is not a mistake if you think about what the lesson in it is for you. And if there's a lesson in it, then you don't have to do it that way again. We're meant to learn that way, or else this would be different. So
that's our jobs, right? Is again, back to that job. So just finally, as a church, this is one of our big steps to walk and come on and have you on and say enough of purity culture. Are there other things you've seen churches do that can, I'm hearing just talking to each other, having a partner, being able to call your sex-informed minister, but also maybe your friend who has children similar age to talk through when you're struggling and your insights are going crazy. But are there other things that churches can do to help with this positive view of body, of learning about our sexuality in the future that we can walk forward in?
yeah, I think a lot of churches are asking this question right now, which is so hopeful to me. So I think having somebody that's on staff or in the community that's willing to say, you know, you're welcome to call and ask me. I raised, you know, 7 kids and I have 5 grandkids or whatever. You know, you can call me. I'm happy to hold your hand. I think it is trying to create that community village co-responsibility again that we used to have. And so it's looking at what are the resources you have right in your community of people that have a little bit more time, have the space and the calm to talk about something, are willing to take kids to the zoo to give somebody a break who's, you know, working all the time or whatever. It's those kinds of things that if we can start to do those while we also have information like what's in that book where people are doing book clubs and they're talking about it and they're whatever. I think that combination of not feeling alone, knowing I've got people to go to, and I'm doing this in community gives us so much support then to do the work that we need to do, right? We just need to not be alone in it. And we've really, as a culture, isolated people. We have held up individualism as the thing, and it's not doing us any favors relationally. We really do need each other. And one of the beauties of churches, and has continued to be, if they can be healthy, is they're multi-generational. And we need that. We actually need that again. I mean, we've always needed it, but we've let go of a lot of it. And it can be such a resource to people in your community, just to know that they're, you know, maybe you put together a group of people that are like, I'm okay to be called or whatever, you know. So I know I have an institute that specifically trains therapists and clergy and educators and stuff on sexual health, just so that there are more people out in the community that actually know what their biases are. They've looked at their stuff, they've got some generalized training, and they feel comfortable having these conversations, you know, because it's just incredibly supportive to people.
I agree. I think coming back to community, I think for a long time, being part of community was about whether you were having sex in the right ways or not in churches. And I think just changing that narrative is so important. Our kids are more than whether or not they are or aren't having sex, or who or they are or aren't having sex with.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, I do think that in the church, those people that have come from purity culture, they, and I talk about this in the first book that I wrote, the Sex, God, and Conservative Church book, but we really need to deconstruct some of the ideas that we were raised with that actually haven't helped us in our relationship. So many straight people are having the worst sex of anybody on the planet because she learned to think about modesty, and her body was dangerous, and who she was dangerous, and he was dangerous. But when you get married, I need to give him what he wants on his schedule. That is the perfect recipe for killing sexual desire. I mean, who likes to clean toilets when they have to? Who likes to have sex when they have to? No one. So there's so much about what we did have for so long that we held up as incredible that actually was bogus. People were having terrible relationships. You know, men didn't know what they wanted in life. They were putting up with having sex with a woman that didn't want to be there. And they were putting up with it because they thought, if I don't do this, I'll get nothing, because that's how their culture raised them. And yet you ask them, what do you really want? And they will say, I just want her. I miss her. And I'm like, you're not getting her, are you? And he's like, no. And I said, that's because she's doing things she doesn't want to do. She's not having fun. She doesn't like this. Our desire for sex given by God was for connection and pleasure to be shared with both people, you know, to share together. And if one of you is not feeling connected and not having pleasure, whatever, it's going to kill desire, because it's for connection, it's for bonding, right? But we have never done it that way in the church, ever.
Yeah.
And so the people having the best sex, and this was actually done in the research that Masters and Johnson last did in the 70s. They did observational research. So they looked at people, gay and lesbian folks having sex, and they looked at straight folks having sex. And what they said was, the people who built anticipation, took their time, found out what each other liked, did various things, those were our gay and lesbian folks. Those were our queer folks. The people having the worst sex were the straight folks, because it was wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And I can tell you from my office and from all the people I supervise clinically around the country, it's the same today. And it's especially bad in the church. So we've got to deconstruct that stuff that we got anyway and be like, that didn't do me any favors. Let's figure out what do I really like? What do I want? What don't I want? You know, and I'm just going to refuse to do anything that's not honoring to me. And I want you to refuse to do anything that's not honoring to you. And then let's figure out what our banquet looks like. I don't want Cheerios every single day. You know, so let's figure out what we like and what we want, and let's change it up and be honoring to us as humans. So we got work to do.
I totally agree. We've already hit an hour. So my final question in ending is just, are there any new books coming out? Are there events that you're doing that we should know about as supporters of this important work that you're doing?
I don't even know what's on my schedule, to be honest. But I would say just follow me probably on Instagram. You know, that's a good place to hear what's happening kind of right now. And that's at Dr. Tina Shameless. And that's a place where I have a whole bunch of stuff posted on my bio there. I have a bunch of podcasts. I have a bunch of just all kinds of resources there. And people are always welcome to DM me if they want to know what's up or whatever. And then if I am in the middle of doing something, like today, I posted a 3-part podcast working on queer folks in the church that just went live today. And so I posted that up there because I know a lot of people will be interested in that. So that's a place where I tend to put things out there. So that's probably a good place to go.
Well, Dr. Tina Shermer Sellers, we just want to thank you for taking time to just talk with us, this little church in Oceanside. We so appreciate your time and your efforts with us today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to be with both of you. And I just wish you guys all the best. And if there's any other way I can support you, you let me know.
All right.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you, community, for joining us. And if you missed any part of this because you came on late, we will have a video recording of it online. So take care. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.